project leader of Rigshospitalet and Hellum. That's still correct. And you are a deputy chairman of the Islamic Christian Study Center. And it looks like you are a prolific writer and author of many articles on practical aspects of Muslim living in the 21st century. At least that's when I scrolled down, I saw that you were answering all sorts of questions. And now you come here to, in a sense, answer our questions. To be a Muslim chaplain in 20 minutes. Wow, that's the challenge. Good to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. It's a privilege to be here today with you all, practitioners, academicians, policymakers from Norway, and I'm looking forward to being with you here today. I only have 20 minutes. I will not be using a PowerPoint presentation, so you can enjoy the beautiful view in the back. So when you will get tired of me and my talking, then you have an alternative. A lot can be said about the function of a Muslim chaplain today in the West. I will take outset from my own experiences, and after my initial studies abroad, I started at the prison as a prison chaplain, substituting for another religious leader for about 1.5 years, delivering Friday prayers and counseling inmates about 6 to 7 hours a week. I could have, of course, used more hours. I then worked on a project for ethnic minorities in the healthcare services, which was the first one of its kind, which both catered for the cultural and religious needs of patients' relatives and gave support to hospital staff through training and supervision. It was and still is the Ethnic Resource Team, as we call it, Etnisk Ressourceteam, a multicultural and multi-religious team, and today is represented by 22 different languages, from Chinese, Swahili, Thai, to the more established religions in Denmark, like Arabic, Turkish, Urdu, Somali, Bosnian, and so forth. And during the project's initial phase, we quickly found out that the needs of the patients and relatives revolved around the religious and spiritual domain. And especially the Muslim patients, when in critical and life-threatening situations, summoned the imam from the hospital staff. Afterwards, I wanted to strengthen my competencies, and I took my chaplaincy course from the UK, from the Markfield Institute of Higher Education, and last year finished my Master's in Pastoral Care from the Faculty of Theology, where your Tor Johan Grevebo was our head of academia, a Norwegian theologian and professor. Just to give you a little insight of a daily life of a Muslim chaplain, a case from yesterday before I was coming to take my flight here to Oslo. The hospital called from a neuro-intensive unit, an African Muslim family who had a young son who was declared brain dead. He was on a respirator which was to be switched off. When they first offered the imam to the family, they rejected it. But when death came close and they understood that now they had to close the respirator, then they wanted to talk to an imam. And I was then called in, and I was called in instantly. I had to make the dua, the prayers. I had to read the Quran. I told them about the procedure and what to say during the last moments of death, the Muslim rituals. Also gave them comfort and said a few words to the family which was all gathered. So also something to do about crowd control. Informed them of the funeral procedure. And because I had to leave, I had to call in another imam who could be there at the time when he exhaled, when he died, during the closure. And the imam, he texted me when he was finished. I actually asked him how did it go when I was coming here towards Norway. Just points to remember that the staff firstly knew who they had to contact. There was availability, which is the key of a chaplaincy function. The arrow of death cannot be postponed. Number two, there was a contact to other Muslim faith communities, so I knew who I had to contact when I myself could not be there. So something about contact to the Muslim community at large from a hospital chaplain. And number three, exchanging and asking the other imam, how did it go? And before, I've also supervised other chaplains who we've used to come in about different questions. So this is from yesterday, and just some reflections on what it means to be a Muslim chaplain. I don't have a lot of time, I've said that 3 times now, but one can either do this job or one cannot do this job. And one quickly finds out that, is this a job which I can do for the next 20, 30 years of my life? Or is it something which I cannot do? And this is the essence of this job of being a chaplain, that it has a lot of meaning to it, it has a lot of value to it, but it also has its price. Family, free time, these things are sometimes put aside because of acute situations which chaplains have to meet at the hospitals. But traditionally this task was upon the head of the family, and still is in many non-Western cultures, that visiting the sick, counseling, and giving sense of bonding and identity is part of the job of the family. So this is something new, that you have Muslim chaplains, and sometimes sometimes you heard, why should we call somebody who we don't know and tell about our problems? It should be inside the family sphere, they say. But today, because of our secularized and individualized society in the West, the task of providing religious and spiritual care is upon the institutions, as we heard before. And also because many ethnic minorities, also Muslims, are exposed and live the same lived reality as the majority populations does. And this is a fact. So, how to be a Muslim chaplain? Firstly, the discussion on what kind of educational qualification does a Muslim chaplain have to have. Is it a secular education or a religious education or both? Because these arise new questions, questions of authority, questions of legitimacy. Number two, religious qualifications. You can also say ritual qualifications. Can he or she read the Quran, deliver sermons, and give answers to bioethical and religious questions, such as organ transplantation, blood transfusions, abortion, and so forth? And remember I said, can he or she read the Quran? So here also the question of female chaplains, which I am in favor of, that we should have in institutions as well. And then number three, can this Muslim chaplain, or does this Muslim chaplain, or to what extent does this Muslim chaplain have a contact with the base, with the Muslim community at large? Does he have a bagland, as we say in Danish, to give him or her legitimacy in the institution? Number four, contact with other faith communities the administration of that institution and other organizations. Does this hospital chaplain or chaplain, any chaplain, does he have the necessary skills to have interreligious dialogue? Can he be a good companion, a good colleague with the rest of the spiritual care team, if that's what you have to name it, like they have in Holland, in Utrecht, as we just heard before? What about questions with the administration? To give you an example, the respiratory situation. What about if the family says, no, this is murder if you close the respirator? We will not allow this. Who decides when to close? Then there's a clash between, can be a clash between the administration and the family, and where does that leave the chaplain? And where does that leave the legitimacy of the chaplaincy services? Number 5, supervision for the chaplain. The chaplain needs to have good supervision, either from colleagues or from other professionals, to deal with the day-to-day challenges which he or she meet. And then you have to have good human qualities for a chaplain. That's very necessary. Things like, are you not non-judgmental? Do you meet the other person where the other person is? Or do you meet the other person where you are yourself? Good listening skills. I had an imam which I had to say no to, who wanted to offer his voluntary services at a hospital because he spoke too much. When I talked to him and my colleague talked to him, it was non-stop. He was turbo, I mean, totally out of control. And we had to say to him that the reason why we cannot take you in is because you have to be a good listener, and we believe that this is not the case with you. Counseling, spiritual direction. The counselor has to give some kind of a spiritual direction to his or her patient or person which he meets or she meets. And this also gives a reflection, or can give some food for thought on the definition of da'wah. What does it mean to have mission at a public institution? Or do we have to define da'wah in a new way, in a new setting, according to the place where we are? And then this again brings us forth to the question of contextualization of religious traditions in public institutions. Very important. And then another quality which the chaplain has to have is training and educate. When I started my chaplaincy work at the prison, like I told you, and then later at the hospital, everybody thought I was an expert on Islam. They saw me as an authority, where I was like, you know, I've just started, I need to learn myself. What I've studied is theory, but I need to know how do I put that into practice. Reflecting on and leading rituals, because that's also what we're asked for to do. Many times, reading the Quran, questions on fasting, on Ramadan issues, Friday prayers, halal food, is that possible? Is it halal? How do I find out if it's halal or not? And again, these kind of issues. And then documenting and writing. A lot of the work I do, I use a lot of my time in documenting what I do, so that our administration and my leaders, they know what is going on. So that is also an important part of to be a Muslim chaplain. You have to document, you have to write articles, you have to show that you are something. You have to show what you are doing. And it's not easy. How do you, we were talking about evidence-based, like my colleague Willem said, but you know, how do you find evidence for caring? I mean, can it be evidence-based? That's another very important point. So concluding my remarks, I would just like to point to an American study led by the University of Michigan, their health system, which finds positive aspects in Muslim hospital chaplaincy. The study was published in the Journal of Religion and Health and argues that 4 major types of roles for imams in the healthcare setup emerged in their thematic analysis. Here are they as follows. Firstly, encouragement of healthy behaviors through religious-based messages in Friday sermons and lectures, so that the chaplain could also be used as somebody who could build the bridge to the Muslim community on the other side by giving messages regarding health and so forth. Number two, performing rituals around life events, illnesses, and death. So the study showed that the patients wanted also imams to perform rituals around life events, illnesses, and death. Number three, advocating for Muslim patients and delivering cultural sensitivity training in hospitals for the hospital staff. And number four, assisting in healthcare decisions for mosque congregants. But participants in this study also identified several areas of cultural conflict and challenges for imams. For example, limited medical knowledge, clinical uncertainty, lack of accessibility and availability of imams are some of the barriers which are mentioned in this report. Another huge barrier is the language. Many of the imams don't talk the language of their native countries, where they live, and also they have cultural problems in understanding the reality of the country and trying to contextualize that reality into the reality of their patients, relatives, and the hospital at large. So this was what I had to give to you this time around. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Yes, you can say. Oh, I can sit. Of course. Okay. So first time doing a dialogue, and of course trying to do that where we try to do it in English for the first time ever. As was introduced, I am Cathrine, and I work as a humanist chaplain, professional humanist chaplain at the Chaplaincy in St. Olavs Hospital in Trondheim. And I am apparently the only one in this country for the time being, so that's my position. My boss addressed some numbers about the way I work earlier today, and I thought I wanted to go back and start there. I have, since I started last September, I've had about 220 counseling sessions with patients in the hospital. And for the most part, these counseling sessions have been directed to me as the humanist chaplain in the hospital. Some of them have been open conversations and counseling sessions where religion and life stance haven't been a part of the conversation. And I found that we have kind of like a split in chaplaincy. We have the part where we are open and inclusive and try to be inclusive to all kind of existential themes and dilemmas. And then we have, sometimes we have to do the specifics. We get religious and lifestyle specific towards our patients. Do you guys recognize that split in the way you work as chaplains in your hospitals? Naveed.
Sorry.
Well, of course. I mean, the human has its physical pain, its psychological pain, its social pain, and its spiritual, existential, religious pain. As Cicely Saunders says in defining what total pain is, her total pain theory. And when I, as a counselor, meet patients, it's very, very different. Sometimes you have the specifics, that's the rituals, which I call them, the questions to specific answers. But most of the time, it's about the general, it's about life crisis, it's about meaning. I was a good Muslim all my life, why did I get cancer? I had twins in my stomach, one of them died. What is the meaning of that? Why did God take my father away from me in such young age? And sometimes, these questions arise which which also give us the chance to address them through a religious domain, because that is what our patients and their relatives want from us. They want answers from our side, and we as chaplains try to give those answers as best to our ability, and try to give them by respecting also their worldviews. But of course, you cannot differentiate between these things. Sometimes in just the one session you have both the general and the specific. And that happens a lot of the time as well. We start by something specific about how can I get my father buried, and then the pain comes up, and the memories come up, and they want to speak to me about that as well. So that requires, on part of the chaplain, really good, skills and education and qualification and competencies as well.
Thank you. We have limited time, so I thought I would just jump to the next question, if you don't mind. This mic. We are here in Norway, and we see that even in the naming of this conference, we had to turn over to the English language, because we don't have a word for chaplaincy. We don't have a word for what we're trying to build, and I myself is stuck in that language, the lack of language. And you described in your presentation a model for how to understand the distinction, the two-legged model, where you describe the distinction between the existential and the treatment domain. You described that without ever using a specific religious word or a life stance wording in your presentations. Do you find that you have built a common ground between you within your chaplaincy tradition? And where is the rest?
We try to avoid specific religious or traditional words, because there are always patients who are wanting to get care in a specific traditional way, of course, and who speak in traditional words and traditional texts and stories and need traditional rituals. And for that patients we try to have in the services we deliver representatives. So it has everything to do with diversity. I'm a big fan of Sadiq Khan, the Muslim mayor of London at this moment, who says we don't have to use the word tolerance anymore, we have to embrace diversity. That's our modern quest, the biggest problem of our Western society. So that's also a challenge for us in our profession. We have to find, and we tried in Utrecht in our way, to find a professional language for what we all share, if we are religious or Muslim or Buddhist or humanist. So find a common language, a professional language, and embrace diversity within your team. I think that is very important.
But then to follow up on that, can you say something about, I think one of the questions I got from the audience was the responsibilities and the practicalities surrounding this the sending organization. It's a term we use, I don't know if it's very English. You represent the Humanist Association of the Netherlands. The priests you work with, the Christian chaplains, they represent the church in the Netherlands. So what is left of those, and how do that relationship materialize itself in your everyday work situation?
It's a formal bond. And I'm a loyal, very critical, but also a loyal member of the Humanist Verbond in Holland, but it's a very small organization. And it works because there is a formal representation. You can be a humanist on your own, then I'm only Willem Blokland. So the formality of the representative, what you represent, the tradition, I think that's very useful in our. There's a new movement in Holland of chaplains who want to throw away every tradition and every representation, and I think that's very problematic, because what is then the difference between you and a psycholog or a social worker? And so I think it's formally very important to keep it, but in practice it is very of little worth.
Okay. One of the consequences of being a representative in another religious or life stance organization is that you also come with some sort of education and qualifications. And if I read the internet correctly, I saw that you actually have done was the first non-Christian to finish the pastoral clinical further education in Denmark. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was not the CPE, but it was the Master in Pastoral Care from the Faculty of Theology. That's right. I was the first. It was the first badge, so I thought my hospital paid for that education. And if I have to put some more words on it, I mean, it was basically a Christian tradition of spiritual care and pastoral care. I ended up writing my thesis on a definition of Islamic pastoral care, because I thought before I, make a comparison between Christian and Muslim spiritual care, I need to know what is Islamic spiritual care. So I had to go one step back, and I tried to find out what is it actually that I'm doing at the hospitals and some of my colleagues are doing here. Now you have the first one in the defense. You have Imam Naveed Baig, who is here today. It's important the first few years to find out what is it that the chaplains are doing. What kind of impact is it having on hospitals, on our patients? Because we have to remember that why we get educated, why we get competencies, it's not for our own selves to start with. It's for the patients. It's for the relatives. It is for them that we are delivering these services. And that's why we're getting these competencies. But of course, education and qualification, I don't think that can be compromised. But that is a big question. What do you do when you don't have people who are well qualified? What is the second best?
Are there any, I know in Netherlands you have a humanist university educating and teaching humanist counselors, I guess would be the correct word. Could you try to say something about what, in your experience as a chaplain in the hospital in Utrecht, could you try to say something about what qualifications you think, well, maybe not concrete education programs, but what are the different academic traditions that someone working as a chaplain should bring with him or her into his work?
That's a big question.
Yes, I know. We're struggling with that one.
The humanistic education in Holland for humanistic chaplains is coming from psychology, philosophy, sociology. A lot of backgrounds, academic backgrounds, and a sort of mixture of it. So it's about meaning of life. But there is no science of the meaning of life. So academically, it's drawn from different academic professions as philosophy, psychology. But it's the mixture and the life stance substance of it which makes it something more than just philosophy. So you have an academic degree, and after that you get your vocational. I don't know if that's also in Norway, but you have your master's degree, and after that you do your ambtsopleiding, we call it. And by the way, it's not only a humanist university, but the Free University of Amsterdam has now Buddhist education program for chaplains, and also a Muslim and a Hindu line. So the diversity in academic developments is also growing. It's nice to see. Is that an answer?
Yes, it is. Although an answer we will probably struggle with further on. One of the things I have experienced starting out this work here in Norway is that there's a lot of people with opinions about how we should do this. And we have different models, as we have been going through all morning. We have different models of how this is done, depending on where you are, in which institutions you are at this current time. Even within the hospital system, we have very different ways of organizing chaplaincies, and also the way the chaplaincies embrace the multicultural and multi-religious society. You yourself, you work now as a Muslim chaplain, and you are hired by the hospital, if I understand you correctly. Do you have a team within the hospital working, and do you work separate from each other based on religion, or do you work as a multi-religious team? Can you say something about that?
Yeah. I'm working at the hospital, hired by the hospital. I'm also sitting in the committee of our under the Justice Department, which hires imams for their prisons. So I'm in that round to judge and to evaluate the different imams who are being recruited for the prisons. And in our team, I also think that diversity is the key, because we have to look at the reality of our societies. And even though there are some forces which are having some problems in understanding or accepting that we're living in a multicultural and multi-religious society, but that is the fact which I meet every single day at the hospital. We have different worldviews, different views on sicknesses, different ways of meeting people, different cultures, different diets, different languages spoken just in one ward. The hospital staff in itself is also very multicultural and multi-religious. So what I would ask for is building trust between communities as one of the main things. But it's also about having humility and giving space to each other. And how much space does it need to give space? I believe that we have to enter that domain, and I think that where Norway is right now is that you are actually feeling the pangs of birth, and hopefully the child will be born and will not need to go to the neonatal afdeling, which is the child intensive area. But I believe that is where Norway is right now, and where Denmark is also right now. But we should not forget the good examples that you also have in Norway, and try to build on that, and try to get inspired from that, because the needs of the patients will not go away. The need of the inmates and prisoners will not go away.
Okay, so 3 minutes. I'm going to send them to Netherlands. Can you perhaps try to give us some inkling on how you have been able to build on each other's resources and competencies, coming together as a diverse team as you are? It's been invigorating to hear about the way your team works, and I've had a talk with you earlier. But do you have any hints on how we can get past our professional differences and occupational differences and religious differences and come together as a diverse team and actually work together as chaplains? This was the main question he was asked, right? What can we learn from you guys? How did you manage to do
dare
this?
to fight.
To fight.
Dare to fight. Dare to speak to each other. Ask for space, because you have a right for space. And look for someone who supports this kind of views. Because if you think we have to invent everything ourselves from our own toes, it will be a difficult journey. We did it 20 years in our team, years of talking before the first Muslim colleague was welcome, and it can be also very painful. So if there is one ministry in your government, or if there is someone taking the lead from an executive board in an institution where you work, who says diversity is the future, then you don't have to quarrel too much. And that can make peace and make you find new ways in a peaceful manner. Thank you. 1 minute.
Okay, then 1 minute just to conclude that we apparently have the day here, spending our day in the NICU for the future chaplaincy of Norway, and hopefully to be able to learn something from you guys. And I hope that all of you guys working in hospital chaplaincies are able to both travel and to read and learn from these guys' experiences, because I have done quite some reading of you guys the last couple of weeks, and it's a very nice perspective and a totally different position than what we have right now here in Norway, but perhaps we will get there. Perhaps Labour will eventually give us some chaplaincy babies. Who knows? Thank you.
Da er det nok en pause, men før dere går